Morning people, welcome back to F Politics. Last night's question time was painful to watch, mainly because it's so obvious that this is what's going to keep happening throughout this election. There are two raging elephants crashing around in every interview room during this election, and we can all see them, but neither the interviewer or the politician seem to want to mention them. Because these are the two talking points you're going to keep hearing. The Labour politician will be asked, so where are you going to get the money to pay for that? And on the other side, the Tories are going to keep accusing Labour of not having a plan and saying that Labour shouldn't just win by default because people aren't happy with the government. So why is nobody mentioning the fact that based on the government's own calculations, there would be £40 billion a year more of government money available to spend on helping the country if we join the EU single market? Because every time Labour is asked, where are you going to get the money to improve education, to fund the NHS, to help with the cost of living crisis, there's £40 billion just sitting on the table that they're refusing to point to. And so on last night's question time, Labour's Bridget Phillipson, soon to be Education Secretary, was constantly on the defensive.
You've got Thames Water who's in debt and their investors saying, well, we're not going to pay. And the government's looking at possible plans to renationalise. Should you be in power, where's the money going to come from?
Well, the water companies need to crack on and make some progress on this, and they should not be paying out bonuses.
So they need to find the money from their investors.
They should not be paying out bonuses to company directors when they are pumping raw sewage into our rivers and into our seas. But I would just say, very politely, we've had 14 years now, and I don't know what the Tories have been doing on this absolute scandal.
Yeah, well, we'll come to them. We'll come to them. But since you want to be in power, I'd like to know where you're going to find the money as well.
And that's especially painful for me to watch because I've worked with Bridget Phillipson. She stood with us when we were trying to stop Brexit because she knows exactly how much of a black hole Brexit is leaving in our finances.
Yet our communities will be hit hardest by this government's Brexit plan. And does he expect us to support another decade of Brexit-driven austerity and decline?
But Labour's been staying quiet about anything huge they plan to do, which is why the Tories complain.
They have no plan. There is no bold action.
And last night, Food Minister Mark Spencer made a similar accusation against Labour.
Now we're into a general election campaign. Suddenly, the Labour Party can't say, when faced with a question, what would you do? They can no longer say, well, I wouldn't do what the government's done. Yep. Suddenly, they've got to come up with a policy, and that was a complete blank space.
What's happened over the last 14 years, Mark?
So the main attack line of the Tories against Labour is basically that Labour should not win by default, simply because people aren't happy with the current government. So what the Tories are really complaining about there is the two-party system. And yet nobody's talking about the fact that the members of the Labour Party, who are about to become the party of government, voted overwhelmingly to end the two-party system. Labour members voted to get rid of our current voting system and replace it with a system where the number of MPs that each party gets matches the percentage of people that voted for them. Because by comparison, if you look at the 2019 election and compare the number of votes needed to get an MP elected, Tory votes are worth 9 times more than Lib Dem votes and 22 times more than Green votes. That's how the Tories managed to get a historic majority of the MPs in Parliament, despite only getting 43.6% of the national vote. And in 1997, Labour managed to get an even bigger majority than that, despite getting an even smaller percentage of the national vote. And people know that, and so many people feel that they can't vote for any party other than Labour or the Tories if they want their votes to actually count. And so Labour and the Tories get more votes than they actually should get. And so why would either of those parties ever actually do their best when all they have to do is just sit around and wait for the other party to screw up so badly that they win by default? You know, like this Tory party. And that's the two-party system that the Tories are complaining about, but without actually mentioning it. So why are both parties being silent on the thing that would kind of solve the main problem they're facing in this election? First off, Labour is sadly still kind of living in 2016. They're scared to talk about how much money the country could save if we started to undo Brexit because they think the country would turn against them. Apparently nobody's told them that the country would vote to rejoin the EU by a ratio of 61 to 39. And as a result, Labour MP after Labour MP is going to spend this election like a deer in headlights every time somebody asks them how they're going to be able to afford their policies. Now, I'm not saying that undoing Brexit would pay for everything, but with the billions of pounds that it would save us, it would definitely make it a lot easier to trust that Labour's budgets add up. And on the Tory side, it's kind of even weirder, because despite complaining about the two-party system, they've gone out of their way to protect it because it often works in their favour, just not this time. For example, Dominic Raab called electoral reform a threat to the Conservative Party.
One referendum on electoral reform, the other a referendum to break up this great United Kingdom of ours. That threat is real.
And then there's Tory Lord Peter Cruddas.
If Labour wins a big majority at the next election, they will reduce the voting age to 16. They will abolish voter ID and they will introduce proportional representation making it almost impossible for the Conservatives to win an outright majority in the future.
They even expanded the first-past-the-post voting system to mayoral elections to make it easier for them to win there as well. Because here's the thing, the Tories have spent the last few years doing everything they can to make it harder for the people to challenge those in power. Why? Because they always expected to be the ones in power. Don't believe me? Listen to Tory MP David Davis talking about their laws on protests.
This bill actually does pose a grave threat to the fundamental right of process. And every law we write must be written on the presumption that it'll be a government very unlike ours that oversees it at some point in the future. What if in 20 years' time we have an extreme right or an extreme left-wing government and we have this sort of vague issue in place?
And then despite saying that, David Davis still voted for that law. And now here we are in David Davis's worst nightmare, because they're about to hand all the authoritarian power that they've amassed over recent years to Labour. And you better believe if Labour starts clamping down on Tory protests, the speed at which they will start complaining about free speech, oh my god. And so getting back to the point, now with the Tories so far behind in the polls, they're complaining about the two-party system because now it's not going to work for them. Labour, the enemy of the Tories, is likely to get a huge majority in Parliament even if they only get a minority of the actual vote. But again, all of this is elephants in the room that neither the two main parties or our media want to talk about. The questions being asked in this election have glaringly obvious answers related to fundamental problems in our democracy and our economy, yet nobody's talking about it. The irony is that by staying silent about the elephants that we can all see, the media and the politicians are just reminding everybody that we deserve better. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics so politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.